Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. It's May the 19th, 2025. Let's talk boxing. But first, remember the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk about some major stories in the sport. Right, folks? It looks like Jake Paul is going to fight Gervonta Davis sometime later this year. Right, folks? That's a treat for all of us. I think that's a great fight. Sometimes, when you're the one in the room making common sense, everyone else thinks you're crazy. But understand what was crazy here was Gervonta Davis fighting a reigning champion who knew him, who was raised with him, who was in the ring with him, who wasn't afraid of him, who can actually fight him from in the pocket. Isn't that the Lamont Roach fight? Right? Think about it. They're fighting, if you believe the Davis side of the ledger, and I don't think I do. Some grease got in his eye, and he decides, having been a decorated amateur, Davis has an extensive amateur career, having been an unbeaten professional champion, Davis in the moment decides, you know what, I got to get this out of my eye. Right? This is the opposite of Ali against Liston. Right? That first fight, Ali gets liniment in his eye and then decides he's going to, survive the round out of necessity. Right? Because his cornerman, Angelo Dundee, after Ali's like saying, cut this off, cut off the gloves, Dundee lets the round go. Right? Ali, blind, is outside dodging shots. Now, here you have Gervonta Davis. Something gets in his eye. He knew he was in a fight. He knew he was in a fight. What does he do mid-round? He goes to his corner. Right? Knowing, as we all did, that would have been counted as a knockdown. Right, folks? Lamont Roach is a real tough opponent. Now, I'm not saying Jake Paul isn't tough. And I believe Jake Paul strategically picked Gervonta Davis. Right? But we all know the weights are too far apart. This is a novelty fight. Even if Davis loses the fight, the idea is going to be that the fight doesn't really tell us much about Davis at 135. Right? He's fighting a guy whose last fight, well, by the time this fight comes around, Jake Paul's last fight would be at 200. But understand, the fight against Mike Tyson was over 220. Right? So you tell me exactly what Gervonta Davis has to lose other than his unbeaten record. Right? Any 135 pounder fighting a guy who's up around 200 has plausible deniability. Can say, look, the guy was too big for me. Not only that, if Jake Paul moves like he did against Mike Tyson, as long as Gervonta Davis moves with him, it's a bad visual for the bigger man. Right? Let's say Jake Paul moves and wins a decision. What's the harm to Davis? As long as Davis is actually pursuing Jake Paul. Right? Davis can say, man, this guy outweighed me by 200 minus 135, 65 pounds, and wouldn't stay in the pocket with me. Now, why pick Davis? Other than the fact that Davis's life outside the ring makes him the perfect guy for a social commentator, joker type fighter to ridicule before the fight. right? Jake Paul can throw out loaded lines like, hey, look, you're not going to hit me like you hit some of the people you've been romantically involved with, right? Jake Paul could make it interesting in the pre-fight, right? Davis, comes across as taking himself really a bit too seriously. Jake Paul has a lot to work with here. You could imagine what Ali would say about him. Right? Someone with a sense of humor could really get under Gervonta Davis's skin, couldn't they? Right? Let me say this too. Elite fighters in the sport who have a problem with movement. Right? We saw that Isaac Cruz, Gervonta Davis fight, didn't we? Let's face it, Isaac Cruz sometimes is getting behind Davis. Davis has to turn. That was a close fight. Davis never gives him a rematch. Right? Pitbull was a problem for Gervonta Davis. Now, say what you want about Jake Paul, folks. He's working on his game. He's improving his game. He has an A-level straight right hand. He knows how to move. Mike Tyson, and I know many of my subscribers believe Tyson, you can't really look at that fight because Tyson didn't come to fight. But Mike Tyson landed 18 punches in that fight. Mike Tyson goes through some multi-round stretch. It's like at least 3 rounds where he lands a total of 1 punch. Look at the CompuBox. Jake Paul has worked on his movement. So, this fight, I can't wait for it. The bigger man's going to be on his back foot. Let's face it, too. Everyone thinks they can hop in the ring with cruiserweights and heavyweights until they get hit. Right? So, to me, if I'm, offering advice to Gervonta Davis, I'm saying, look, man, take the big money. That's what Jake Paul is these days. Big money. Take the big money in the low-risk fight, right? Jake Paul doesn't know you like Lamont Roach knows you. Right? Lamont Roach has a title. He is a champion. What title does Jake Paul have? Jake Paul lost to Tommy Fury. Couldn't handle the feints. Right? Also, there's a distinct possibility that Jake Paul moves away from Davis too much. Davis is not going to be under the level of fire that he was with Lamont Roach. I'm not saying Roach hits as hard as Jake Paul does. But what I am saying is Roach is going to bring the fight to you. Right? You're going to look like you're running if you move away from Lamont Roach. Also, the narrative's a bad one for you. You're the bigger man. You're 135. You got all these dudes. All these dudes in your division. Shakur Stevenson, Keyshawn Davis, William Zepeda, Lomachenko. And who are you fighting? You're fighting the champ at 135. Player, tell all of us how that helps your legacy. Then it's even worse than that. You don't even win the fight. Because, of course, Lamont knows you. You're not the big bad wolf. You're the guy he's already been in the ring with. Right? Let's face it. If Mike Tyson were raised in our neighborhood, we would think of him as lovable Mike Tyson. We would think of him as the brother who lives, 1 street over. The rest of the world would think of him as some major terror. Right? We would think of him as the guy we ran into at the block party. Right? So to me, whoever told Gervonta Davis to fight Lamont Roach, that's malpractice. That was a terrible decision. Little upside with major possibility of downside. Why not fight Emmanuel Navarrete? That's a more interesting fight. Well, let me just shift gears. I'm looking forward to Jake Paul, Gervonta Davis. I think the promotion's going to be off the chain. I think the fight's going to be interesting. It's going to have a unique visual. right? We can laugh at Jake Paul. Every time Jake Paul lands that straight right, and Jake Paul has a left hook too, but every time he lands that straight right, we're going to be wondering whether Gervonta Davis can take the punch. Also, let's face it, Davis sometimes gets lost in the flow. Didn't Floyd Mayweather have to get out of his seat, walk over to Davis mid-fight to tell him that on his scorecard, Davis was having problems with Mario Barrios? Right? Think about it. That fight's so interesting that Manny Pacquiao is coming back from retirement after seeing Barrios against Davis, Abel Ramos, and Pacquiao wants some of that smoke. Well, I'm sure Jake Paul saw that fight too and thought, man, if Davis got lost in the woods and needed mid-fight advice to beat Mario Barrios, maybe I have a shot. Also, let's face it too, Davis is interesting. The resume's interesting because he's been champion in different weight classes already. Right? We just haven't noticed because, of course, again, the guy's not fighting Shakur Stevenson. The guy, was at higher weights, doesn't want to go back there. Maybe Regis Prograis has him shaking in his boots. Maybe he knows that a skilled southpaw, not afraid to go back foot, who's a counterpuncher, Jack Catterall, would give him problems. Let's talk about some other fights. Now, this Queens boy. This guy raised in Queens. I went to high school in the Bronx, but I was raised in Queens. I'm thrilled. I am thrilled to hear that Edgar Berlanga, New Yorker himself, is fighting Hamza Sheeraz. Big city, but UK. In Queens. Louis Armstrong Stadium. Truth be told, Louis Armstrong Stadium, they blew up the old one. This one was built just a few years ago, in 2018. 14,000 people can be in that arena. Right, folks? I'm thrilled that they're actually having this fight in a real part of New York. Right? I see all these shows, and I know the world does. Right? Sex and the City, Cheers. Right? All of these shows from New York are where they're in Manhattan. Occasionally you have the King of Queens and stuff like that. Whenever they show you a show from Brooklyn, it's either some mob show or it's someone getting killed, right? It's some crime show. Well, understand the current mayor of New York City is from Brooklyn. Understand Brooklyn and Queens, my neck of the woods, have many more people, many more residents than Manhattan. Got news for you. When you're in Manhattan, you can't see the buildings. It's when you're on the promenade in Brooklyn that you look out and you see the skyline. Right? People travel to New York and, everyone wants to go to the restaurants and the garden in Manhattan. They want to go to Manhattan, and I don't blame them. Right? But it's nice to see a fight, big fight, in New York City involving a native that's actually from Queens. I'm looking forward to this fight. I'm looking forward to seeing the new Louis Armstrong. By the way, he was a Queens guy, right? Lived in Queens. New Orleans, I'm not claiming him, but I'm just saying he did move to Queens. Right? He was a Queens guy later in his life. Right? Understand, not every celebrity lives in Manhattan. Isn't Spike Lee a Brooklynite? Right, folks, to get to this location, you can take either the LIRR, Long Island Railroad, right? So you're going to have people, the Jerry Cooney crowd coming in for this fight. And, of course, as Met fans well know, you can take the 7 train to get to this location. Right? As I've said here for years, I was raised in a part of Queens where you had a lot of people who thought they could box. right? But understand, you don't have, gyms and stuff like that all over the place. This is a far cry from Philly, right? You don't have boxing gyms and stuff like that. So you have a lot of, young men looking for things to do, getting in trouble in Jamaica, Queens, Queens Village, right? You know, Malcolm X used to live in Queens, right? You have a whole belt in Queens where if promoters, managers, gym operators just started opening up some gyms, they'd be flooded. Right? John Gotti lived in Queens. Right? I'm tired of hearing about Gleason's gym. I'm tired about hearing, about some gyms in Brooklyn and, you know, Joseph Akbeko Bronx and stuff like that. Right? If someone just opened up a gym off the E or F line, folks, it'd be packed. Pay close attention to this Berlanga Sheeraz fight, not just the fight itself, but the promotion. Now let's talk about a big fight where things are changing fast, right? We're noticing this because, of course, we gamble. You and I gamble. Location matters. Now, some words that almost certainly mean, unless your name is Dimitri Bivol, that you're going to lose the fight, that it's uphill, and it's steep uphill. Even the Bivol fight. Revisit that fight. Understand, the first few rounds of that fight, the first 4 or so rounds, they gave it to Canelo. You understand the words Canelo in Vegas means you're starting that fight down 2 rounds. I know there's a crowd out there, Aztec Warrior, I can hear you now, that believe I'm biased against Canelo. Right? Just like years ago I was hearing I was biased against every British fighter. Right? Folks, come on. Sometimes, let's just call it as we see it. If you're fighting Canelo in Vegas, right? And I'm talking without a weight discrepancy. I'm talking about you're at 168 pounds. We all know that Canelo at T-Mobile, you're entering the ring down big. Now that's the nature of boxing, right? Canelo is kind of like a modern day Joe Louis. And let's face it, Joe gets knocked down twice by Jersey Joe Walcott. He lost that fight. Right? Look up that fight. He lost that fight. But he's Joe Louis. When you build a brand, when you feed a lot of people in the sport, when you've been A-list for years, people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt in fights, aren't they? Right? With these Canelo fights too, what you need to do is an autopsy of the fight. In other words, you see a fight, you see Caleb Plant giving Canelo all kinds of problems. Right? Eventually, Canelo catches up to him and stops him. I'm not here saying Canelo didn't win the fight. He won the fight. Right? But I'm saying, wow, this fight was close. Then, of course, you're looking at the scorecards afterwards and you're like, man, they had this a little wide. Then you start realizing, wow, I saw the fight. It looked close to me, but it's Canelo. Judges are going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Well, guess what, folks? Things are moving in boxing. Now we're hearing the date of this Crawford-Canelo fight might change. Now we're hearing the location of this Canelo-Crawford fight might change. Folks, that's big. That's big. I mean, understand, Crawford, great fighter, future Hall of Famer, right? But the bottom line was Crawford was going to show up and he was going to start that fight down, 2 rounds, 3 rounds? Right now they're changing the location, supposedly. Keep an eye on that story, right? Because, let's just say in a different location, the odds of the fight should change, right? Because you understood, De La Hoya in Vegas, he was starting fights up a few rounds. Floyd, who was not loved. But Floyd in Vegas, you understood he's starting the fight up a few rounds. Right? Floyd loved Vegas so much he hardly ever fought anywhere else. Right? There is also the bright lights problem, where, good fighters, perhaps great fighters, have been fighting, but their fights haven't had the big buzz. Right? They're interesting to boxing hardcore people. But, you remember when Crawford was with Top Rank, we were hearing that Crawford couldn't really sell tickets. In other words, you could be a Hall of Fame fighter. Fighting Canelo's a little bit different. Now, Crawford's had his share of big fights since then, right? The Errol Spence fight was huge. Right? But you know what's been happening to opponents, right? I've watched Bevo fights where the camera moves a little bit away from the ring and some of those seating sections look a little bit sparse. Right? There isn't as much money in boxing as you think, even today with Riyadh season. Right? There isn't as much money in boxing as you think. A lot of these world-class fighters really haven't fought, in a place like Vegas, where it's, glamour hotels, there's the strip, there's the hype, right? You arrive at the MGM Grand, you walk in the lobby, and there are cameras everywhere, and, there's a crowd there waiting for you. Right? It's overwhelming. The incumbents, the Oscar De La Hoyas, when he owned Cinco de Mayo weekend. Right? The Floyd Mayweathers, the Manny Pacquiaos. They've been there. They've seen it. In fact, I mentioned for a reason the MGM Grand lobby, because there was a time, maybe it's still now, but there was a time where you would walk in there and they had a Floyd case. Right? You could actually go over there and see, the jacket Floyd wore into the ring for some big fights. Trunks that Floyd wore. Right? The incumbents are the incumbents. Canelo in Vegas is much harder to beat than Canelo in some other locations. Let's pay attention to where that fight ultimately ends up. Dana White, UFC, they actually have a promotion they're doing when the Canelo Crawford fight's supposed to take place. That's going to complicate life for everyone. Right? And so just understand, a lot of stuff's changing in boxing, right? Riyadh season, none of us heard of that years ago. Now it's front and center and they're doing the biggest fights. Right now, the zone is really a boxing centerpiece, isn't it? Right? So Crawford, Canelo, folks, location matters, right? Understand, I've been here online talking about location fights. I saw Joe Parker against Andy Ruiz, right? Both guys, 4-time, have had shares of the heavyweight title, right? I saw that fight take place in Joe Parker's backyard, and I thought to myself, had this fight taken place in the United States, particularly in California or Vegas, or Arizona, let's give a nod to the house that Benavidez is building, right? I thought Andy Ruiz would win that fight. The location matters. Let's not pretend that it doesn't. Right? So, Crawford, Canelo, the devil's in the details. It's past the midway point of May. They still don't know where this fight's going to happen. Right? Let's pay attention to that. It matters. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.